right. Well, welcome to the show. Can you tell me real quick? I should have asked you this before I pressed record. I've always said in my head Jadawin. Is it Jadawin or Jadawin?
Jadawin.
Jadawin. Welcome to the show, Jadawin.
There you go. Most people call me Jad, actually. Most people don't like say the whole thing. But there's
Can
a
I?
lot of people that say Jada or Jada.
So it is Jadawin.
Correct.
So I've got a ton of questions, and this is great that you're on the show because I could finally ask you everything that I've been wondering about since I met you on the game.
It's been a few years.
It has, yeah. It was Mischief when we first started playing.
Yeah.
And at the time, this is my first question: is you were Sval, right?
Correct. That was the first character that I made on Mischief back in Kunark on Mischief. I actually didn't even know the server was going and someone told me about it. And so I joined kind of halfway through Kunark and just like leveled up by myself because I didn't really know anybody. And I hit 60 and got my epic just a little bit before Velios came out. And actually was just looking for a guild, and the recruiter for Faceless actually contacted me, and I joined right before we did the Velios launch.
Wow. Okay. What inspired the name change from Sval to Jadawin?
So I've been Jadawin forever in every video game I've played for like 20 years now. And I wasn't really sure if I was going to play a monk, and so I didn't really want to take up the name Jadawin. And I played a human monk way back in the day, like during Kunark, during live Everquest, and his name was Sval Turning, and that was the name of my first character on Mischief.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning. What was your first encounter with EverQuest? How did you first hear about it? How old were you?
So it had to be, I was either a junior or senior in college. It was like 98 or 99. And, we'd been playing other games like StarCraft and Diablo, um, and Ultima Online. And then there was just some rumblings about this new, MMO that was coming out. And for me and most of my friends, we were kind of really deep into Ultima Online. But, I don't know if you played that game, but it's basically like a top-down ARPG, but like an MMO version of one where like you actually interact with other people and there's a real world you play in. And so I didn't actually even play EverQuest the first couple months it was out because I was like, oh, we'll see if it's any good later. I've been playing Ultima Online like just crazy amount of hours. I put a ton of time into that game, and I had some really, really decked out characters. And
Were you
one of
there
my
when
best, what'd you say?
were you there when Lord British got assassinated?
No, I was not there when
Okay.
Lord British got assassinated. I do remember that though. And then a buddy of mine named Pat, he was like, "Hey, you need to come over to my house and play this EverQuest game because it's amazing." He had just been playing. The game hadn't been out very long, but he had a copy and he had an account. And he's like, "Here, just sit down and just play the game." And I ended up playing for almost 4 days straight. I didn't leave his house.
Whoa.
And like the first character I made was like this half elf ranger named Bremerin. I remember that very vividly. And I remember like the very, very moment that I knew I was hooked is I was playing in GFA, and I was just running around killing skeletons and, like wasps over in GFA in the newbie area. And I started getting to the point where I could like maybe start trying to go to Orc Hill. And I remember running over there and seeing this wood elf druid, and he was kind of running away from me. And I was like, hey, 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 hey. And I kept hitting the hail button. And then, like he turned around, ran at me, and like waved at me and like the in-game wave animation. And it was just like, to me, it was so amazing that there was another person that you were interacting with in that way of the world that was so different from anything else that I'd ever experienced. Like instantaneously, I was hooked. I was like, oh, this shit is amazing. And I played constantly for years after that. I didn't play another game. I never logged into Ultima again after that. That 4 day stretch, I got my own account and then I started over and just played nonstop.
What do you think it was about? Was it the graphics, the 3D, the first person that because I know in Ultima Online you can communicate with other players, but uh,
Yeah, but it was different, right? So like in Ultima, I felt like, since it was a top-down view and it was almost like an ARPG, I just felt like you kind of lacked that connection with another player. And I just felt like being able to like look at someone, wave, interact with them in that manner, and like it almost felt like you were in a more vivid world, if you would, and it just seemed really, really engaging to go out and meet people, and just the world seems so much bigger. It's like stepping out of GFA even into Butcher Block. You're like, oh shit, what am I gonna do now?
Yeah, that's the thing. I think the first person view has this level of immersion because no person in the real world can see themselves in any given moment in time. We all have this first person view. We're seeing everything appear in front of us, but there's no ability to actually see ourselves. So there's a lot of unknown about
Hmm.
how we are interfacing with reality. And that I feel like that got created in EverQuest through the immersion that you just described.
Oh yeah.
Okay, so you're in there. You're in Greater Fadark. You wave at the Wood Elf. You don't leave your friend's house for 4 days.
Yep.
What was
And
it
then
like?
it was amazing. It was like I honestly felt for the first time in a long time that like I guess it was something new. I mean, like we'd all played ARPGs, right? We'd played Diablo, we'd played StarCraft, we played those games like that. Um, and it was just something where like I felt like there was a never-ending stream of possibilities. Like just waiting for a boat and then traveling on the boat, going through Ocean of Tears, getting to Freeport, running into North Row and going to the dervish camps. It's like every little thing was a new adventure, and like there were new people to meet and interact with in every spot, and you were constantly learning, and it didn't feel like there was any end to what the possibilities were, and that was just very rare to find.
Absolutely. What was the early days like for you? What you did the 4 days, you went and got your own account. Was your real life screwed up after that, or was it just did you integrate it in? Is that what you did?
Yeah, so basically what I did was I worked in a restaurant for the first part of my working career, even after I finished college. And basically, I was either going to school, I was working, or I was playing EverQuest, or I was sleeping. Those are the only things that I was doing. That's it, nothing else. Um, and so when I got my own account, I actually started a Dark Elf Necromancer just because I just kind of dug the kind of evil, undead necromancer kind of like, I guess, uh, lore behind it, I guess. And I played that character for a really, really long time. I played that character all the way into kind of middle of Kunark before I stopped playing that character, actually.
So so do what do you how far did you get him?
I got the Necromancer to about 55, I think, as my first character when I was still horribly shit at the game and had no idea what I was doing. um, but that was another thing. It's like, um, and I think that that's kind of been lost kind of as you become really familiar with the game and other games in general is there was no end game, right? Like we weren't thinking about, oh, we've got to get to Vishan's Peak to raid, or we've got to go raid the Plane of Fear, right? It was just, hey, what are we gonna go do today? And we just did the most asinine things, me and my buddies. Like there was a time where we got like 4 levels in a row, and the way that we got those 4 levels was we were in the Karanas at a druid circle, and we were killing the druid NPCs that spawned once every 30 minutes. It took us like 3 weeks to get 4 levels, but we had a great time doing it. It was just funny. And there were times where they weren't separated and the fear would break because it was like a necro and a wizard playing together. But I mean, like super inefficient. And then like we got turned on to, if you're a super old school EQ head, there was this camp in the Karanas where there was 2 big treants that would spawn, and there'd be a group of 6 people there waiting every 20 minutes to kill these 2 treants. We did a couple levels there, and it's like we never did the most optimal thing because we had no idea what the most optimal thing was, but we were constantly doing things that were just kind of like ridiculous at the same time because we didn't know what we were doing, but also really, really enjoyable. And like every place we went was a new experience. And so there was never any like I guess pressure to be like, oh, we need to be max level because we want to do this, because everything we were doing was super fun and enjoyable.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even think the idea of an end game even existed at that time. Like nobody knew what the end game actually was, and because from Doomsday's, the way he was describing it, and I've heard Zayd talk about, is the guilds would have websites and they would share screenshots, and the only real information you got about what was in the world or even accessible was through people that were figuring it out as they did it.
Yeah. So for me, I didn't do any end game at all in Classic. I never went to Plane of Fear. I never went to Plane of Hate. I never did any of that. In Kunark, I finally, because I swapped a wizard halfway through Kunark because I was just kind of tired of playing the Necromancer, so I swapped a warrior, and I ended up started doing Plane of Hate raids in Kunark, which obviously wasn't current content, but it was like my first kind of entrance into kind of like pseudo end game content, even though then it was like Vishan's Peak. But like aside from that, I didn't really do any end game. But then when Velios came out, I finally started getting into real guilds and doing real content and doing NTOV, And that's when kind of the allure of raiding and end game content became kind of the general push for me as a player.
So up until that point, so one of the things that I'm always curious about, well, first of all, it was interesting to me when I first met you, and it's surprising to hear that you started like you started playing with the faceless during Mischief. Because for some reason in my head, I thought you were always an officer.
So I was an officer almost the entire time on Mischief, and I was a raid leader at the start of this server as well. But ultimately, I've been kind of a raid leader slash officer in this game and World of Warcraft for like the last 15 years. And I just, for me personally, I have more fun if I'm just playing the game myself and enjoying myself. And unfortunately, being a raid leader is fun in some aspects. In other aspects, it's kind of a drag because there's a lot of stuff you have to deal with. And I just don't really enjoy dealing with that stuff all the time. So I just enjoy logging in, having a good time, and playing the game.
Yeah, that's kind of how I am. That's why I'm always so curious about people that can do the raid leading and all that because
Yeah.
I don't know how. It's like a different game almost.
Yeah. I mean, I think that it's a skill like anything else. It's just if you have a lot of experience with it, I did a lot of raid leading in World of Warcraft, and I'm a vocal person, and so a lot of times people just assume that I'm an officer just because I talk a lot. And I have insight, and I typically do the polling for like our progression races and stuff like that, just because people trust me in that role and they know that I know what I'm doing. But ultimately, I just tell people, I'm just a regular guy like everyone else. I just maybe have a little more experience and a little more tenure in the guild, and so I think a lot of times people mistake that because I get asked for officer questions like all the time, and it's like, yeah, I'm not an officer, buddy. Sorry, I can't help you out with that.
Yeah, I definitely have sent you a bunch of those.
Yeah, so
The
it's
Go ahead.
it's just like personal preference. I think some people really enjoy that role and enjoy that the responsibility, and more power to them because they do a thankless job, and we really appreciate the work they put into that job.
Oh, 100%. Like it's amazing to me. It makes me want to like play well for the people that do the put the work in for us.
Yeah.
So you're rating in Velius. This is original EQ times. The question that I had was, were there any moments in your ever so I guess I'll say this by saying when I play EverQuest, there's something that happens and I'm sensitive to feelings like anxiety and my reputation matters and speaking up or feelings like my feelings can get hurt in the game. You know what I mean? Which
hmm
is doesn't usually happen to me in any other games. I was wondering what was that like for you early on? Did you have any experiences where you were like something that happened in the game really depressed you or something that you got angry about? Like how was that navigating interpersonally?
And so I think for me, the only instances I've had of that was like two times it's happened. Um, the first time was in EverQuest during probably classic or very early Kunark. We were doing a Plane of Fear break, and I was on my Necromancer, and I literally had zero experience as to what we were doing. And I had gone in, and instead of going left up to the wall, I had turned right and pulled a bunch of mobs into the camp and kind of wiped people. And then I was kind of berated and kind of made fun of because I didn't really know what I was doing. And I think that was kind of a catalyst for a lot of things, like future in gaming, is where it's like, okay, so they're mad at me, but it's not because I'm bad at the game. It's just because I didn't know what the hell I was doing. And so, really, really trying to always prepare myself, like absolutely, and understanding exactly what's going on before I do something, really, really became a very, very driving force in my overall gaming. And the other time it happened was very similar. Is when I actually stopped playing EverQuest and went to World of Warcraft. And there was a situation where I was doing a dungeon. And of course, I'm just some crappy EQ player trying to play World of Warcraft. And we had the way the game functions is just completely different. And I'm like trying to direct people as a tank as how like an EQ tank would play World of Warcraft, and that just didn't work. And I basically got kicked out of the group and made fun of pretty hardcore. And again, it was kind of like, okay, I just need to change my knowledge level and my skill level here because right now I'm getting made fun of again because I don't really know what's going on. Um, but aside from that, I'm a super, super intense guy when it comes to like out of game study and out of game preparation to make sure that I know exactly what's going on. And so not a lot of times have I been given a lot of shit for not really knowing what was going on aside from those two things. Because after that, I kind of really, really made sure that anytime I was doing something, a little bit more resources in World of Warcraft, but I mean, like you can watch endless videos, you can look at logs, you can do all kinds of things that really prepare you before you get into those things. Um, and it's just it's really, really helpful in terms of your learning curve if you're ahead of the game before it even starts.
What do you think that is? Where do you think you got that from? Because to me that sounds rare. I don't really. It's the first time I've heard somebody explain it that way. That because like you hit something happened that affected you emotionally, or you made you feel a type of way, and then you said, "I'm not going to let this happen again," and so you had a plan to resolve that. Where do you is that have any correlation to your real life too, with how
Yeah, I
you
mean, I
approach
just think I'm
problems?
I think I'm intensely competitive, like almost to a fault intensely competitive. And I think that at the end of the day, all I really want to do is win. Doesn't really
Mm.
matter like how well I perform as long as I win. Ultimately, um, in this game and other games, a lot of times the things that impact winning have nothing to do with how much damage you do or how much healing you do. They really have to do with the little things that really make a difference, like understanding when to be on a proper target or understanding when to use your DPS cooldowns or, understanding how to position something properly. There's so many things that go into winning and losing that have nothing to do with how much damage you do. And I just think that for me, I've really, really just tried to focus on winning more than anything. And I think that that's really, really served me well in gaming in general.
That's okay. So that's cool. So when does that so because that's a little different than when your first EQ experience of just adventures when you log on,
Hmm.
and then you get to this raid and you realize you wipe it and then you're like, what did you have that for StarCraft and Ultima Online as well? Like you wanted to win, you wanted to be the best PvP in Ultima or survive the most? Or was
So I think in Ultimate it was a little bit different because you weren't really on a level playing field in Ultima. Like if you had a six-time GM character and you had anatomy, right, you basically could never die. And um, you know, once you kind of had a really good character, it was pretty easy. But like there's such a it's a pretty level playing field in EverQuest in general. Most of the people you play with in your group are going to be very similarly geared and experienced. And so, um, it became one of those things where when I joined, the first real guild I joined was a guild called Reconstructed on, I don't know how to say it, but it's ECI is the name of the server, a super old school server. It's called Reconstructed. And I remember joining as a warrior, and there's, of course, back in the day, right, you had 47 warriors in every guild, and everybody wanted to be the guy, right? Like everyone wanted to be the guy that tanked first, that got all the gear, that was like the dude. And I don't know if like that kind of mindset just kind of carried over into all the other characters I played, but I basically looked at everything as, hey, how do I set myself apart? How do I become, the guy, and how do I move up in the kind of the pecking order to become the dude, right? Ultimately, like the main guy was the main guy forever. I never passed him up, but I became like the number three guy or something like that. So I was constantly tanking stuff. And like I think that there's this certain social aspect of the game where, especially not as much anymore, but like back in the day, there was always like one guy that was the tank, right? And everybody wanted to be him. And there was no denying that if you were playing a warrior and you never got to tank, your life sucked, right? Because that was kind of your moment to like stand up, stand in front of the mob, tank it, and then hopefully, lead your team to victory there. But um, sometimes if you were a newer player, it was very, very hard to kind of make your way into that group.
Dude, that is it's so surprising to hear because I always look at the Warriors and you polling like I followed you into the Fire Lake because I wanted to learn I think it was 2 nights ago because
Yeah, yeah.
I have that same drive within me that if I'm playing I want to be the most efficient I possibly can be
Hmm.
because and that's why I think I feel so connected with Faceless is because the drive to succeed is there and I like being part of people that are trying to be the best they can.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, I follow you into the lake because the idea that I would be pulling for the raid is like I can't even imagine. Like it feels like I would be so stressed and anxious about screwing up or But like you said, I guess the reason I followed you into the Fire Lake was because if I learn, if I see, if I can learn it, I could probably do it.
Yeah, and I think a lot of monks have asked me like, "Hey, how do I make this pull? You know, what am I supposed to do here?" And I think the best advice I can ever give anybody is like, obviously, don't go like off the reservation and just start pulling anything, right? But like, don't be afraid to make mistakes. I mean, ultimately, I think most monks they fall prey to this like fancy pulling syndrome where they think they have to single pull everything into the camp. It's like, bro, we got 70 people in the raid and 14 tanks. It's okay if we bring a couple ads. It's not a big deal. You can't really mess it up that bad, you know? Um, and really, the biggest teacher in anything is just experience. That's it. You know, and like understanding that even if you make a not optimal pull, you're still going to be fine and you're going to learn from it. And the next time you're just going to be better. I mean, like I've pulled North Temple of Ishan probably 100 times at this point, right? I was not this good the first time I did it. I didn't really understand all the spots and all the ways I could, maneuver the zone and, LOS pull things with a javelin or single pull something or pull some guards from a dragon. I mean, there's a lot of little tricks that you just learn over time. And the only way you learn is just by doing, right? And I think far too often people are just a little bit too timid because they're afraid of making a mistake and looking bad. But they have to understand that that timidness, all that does is like a self-fulfilling process prophecy where you're never going to get to that point where you feel comfortable because you're afraid to just take your shot, you know?
Yeah, 100%. So you're watching the Warrior and you're going, but here's another question. I guess I'm wondering about early days EQ. Did people know that Warriors were going to be that important when raiding happened?
um, I think probably the really, really high end players did. I did not. I remember this kind of a funny story about how bad I was. I remember like really far back in the day, um, someone said something about a warrior, and I was like, who would ever group with a warrior? They're just trash, because we were grouping in like lower Guck and like in lower Guck. We had paladins with ghoul banes. They had a 300 hit point heal. They could tank. They did a ton of damage. They had better aggro. It's like everything. Why would you ever want a warrior? They just suck ass, right?
Yeah.
And I think that was maybe a little bit naive. And I think again, I think the high end players understood that like, hey, this class is going to be really important later on, but definitely not me. And obviously, when I started playing Warrior, I was well aware of like the disciplines that were available in Kunark, and I pretty much I didn't view them initially as like a defensive thing to like I could do my job better. I was like, oh shit, I got Mighty Strike. I can crit everything for 30 seconds. Let's go. And so me and my buddy would be like, all right, let me get down into Berserker Frenzy. I'm gonna hit Mighty Strike and I'm gonna pop off. Let's go.
Yeah.
So, you know, and I think I really got lucky that I chose Warrior because it was a great class to get involved in raiding. Obviously it took me a little while to get to the point where I was actually in the rotation for tanking, and I really didn't get into the rotation until we killed Zerka the Creator, and I got a Hate Giver, and we only had three warriors with enraging blow weapons at a time, and I was one of them, and so immediately, right, I have the big aggro weapon, and I'm in the rotation for tanking basically from then on out, and that was a really really good segue into like real raiding, talking with other guys, working with other tanks, understanding how to do your job, understanding how to like if we lose a tank, jump in, hit a furious, get the mob, how to call for heals, how to talk about, incoming heals and if a mob was slowed or not. It was just a really, really good introduction to playing with the team and really starting to work as a unit instead of just trying to be like a good player.
Did you ever step into kind of like a strategy type role, like collaborating with the leaders of the guild?
No, I was pretty much just a regular player in that guild. We started like this is super old school shit, but I started trying to do some statistical analysis. Me doing that, imagine that. Um, about the difference between evasive and defensive with Luckland AAs, because once you had all the Luckland AAs, you actually I think evasive ended up being less damage taken overall, but it was super spiky, right? And it's kind of like the age old question: what's better, to take less damage or to be have your damage in like incoming damage be more smooth? And obviously, the general consensus is that you want to have the damage be really smooth and even, rather than try to avoid the most damage, because just because you take less damage but you're prone to dying doesn't make you a better tank, right? So that was pretty much the only contribution I had at that time. Um, in terms of like any kind of strategic planning or
Test.
evaluation.
You did some testing on it.
Oh, like, but I had to do some like stupid testing where like I had to like do a log, get the log, come out, look at every time I was hit or missed, and then do the math on it. It was really arduous. Now, obviously, we have like EQ log parser, and you can basically just figure it out in like 10 seconds. Back then, it was like a multi-hour process to get all the data together and then crunch it all.
Right, with a calculator and everything.
Yeah, it was bad.
So where are we at now in your timeline? Your first, you get your we're in your timeline of your first run of EverQuest.
hmm
Scars of Velius is out, your rating. Lachlan comes out. How are you feeling? How is it by this point? You're probably 21, 22, 23. Is it still work, school, EverQuest?
Yeah, so here's basically what happened is um obviously I finished school in 2000. And so I was working, and obviously, the more I was working, the less I was getting to play. For the first about um, 5 years of my working career after college was working in restaurants, and I worked a lot of evenings. And so I came into Shadows of Lucklin with my guild, and I we finished Lucklin progression. We killed Aten Ra first on the server. It was great.
Oh,
Everything
wow.
was good. And then I kind of went after that. I just really didn't have the time to invest in playing like a hardcore raider. Still in the guild, still playing, but didn't really do all of Planes of Power prog. Ended up getting into playing the time late, after I got a back flags. Um, and I just never really played the game in like a super hardcore capacity again for a really long time, and actually stopped playing for a couple years at one point. Um, And then I came back and reached out to one of the old officers from Reconstructed, whose name was Drayron. And he was an officer in a guild called Township Rebellion, which is a very, very well known guild. It's been around forever. And I said, hey, I'm thinking about coming back to play the game. Would you guys be recruiting? Could I get into the guild? Of course, I had no idea that Township Rebellion was that good of a guild when I asked him that question. But he's like, yeah, sure. You just need to play a Berserker because we don't have really any, and they're like the best class in the game right now. So I was like, all right, bet. So I just started the arduous process of leveling a berserker from zero, getting caught up on levels and AAs, and getting into the guild. And along the way, played with some other guilds to kind of like leapfrog some gear and some resources so I could get like my 2.0 and get some raiding experience. And then joined Township Rebellion, which when I joined them at the time was one of the top probably four guilds in the entire game. Um, and then I played with them for a really, really long time.
What
Um,
expansion were they in when you joined?
Oh, they were, I can't remember. I think I joined in TSS. I think is when I joined. I can't really
Wow.
remember though.
So that's like 2009,
Yeah, TSS came out in 2006.
2006. Okay.
Yeah. And then basically it went super hardcore with EverQuest from that point for a good ways forward. I just switched careers. I'd gotten out of the restaurant business and I was working basically a day job for a transportation company. And so I had every evening available. And so kind of like the nerdy gamer's dream. It's like I work in the morning and then I have every evening to play EverQuest. Um,
Man.
and I played nonstop. We did several expansions. Um, I ended up playing with Township Rebellion through probably Seeds of Destruction before I went to a guild called Triality. And when we finished House of Thule, I that was the last expansion that I'd actually played live EverQuest at that point. Is a lot of circumstances in terms of like our relationship with the devs and us getting suspended for basically DZ lockout skipping, where we would kill a raid boss and then everyone would drop the DZ before the raid boss died, and then we would get the loot and the flags on some people, and the other people would just do another DZ after that, and there was a lot of drama about it. So, but whatever. Eventually, we finished House of Thule, and kind of the writing was on the wall that ROI was going to become. We had our top players were leaving to join ROI because they were just better than us. Even though Triality had been kind of the number one guild in the game, it's like kind of them, Crimson Tempest, um, had kind of like ping pong back and forth. But ROI was pretty much there to stay at that point. I think they went on to like 14 years of like never losing an expansion. But I'd gotten really into WoW at that point. I'd started playing WoW quite a bit. And so after we defeated House of Thule, I played WoW for a really, really long time. And I didn't actually pick up EverQuest again until 2020 or 2021 when Mischief was out and I started playing on Mischief. That was the first time I'd played in a really long time.
Okay, I've got a bunch of questions now. So I know Triality because of Quarkin. Is that
Yeah,
correct?
yeah.
Was
Corkin's
that
Iron.
did he go to ROI? Was he one of the players that transitioned?
So he did eventually go to ROI, but it was after I'd quit playing. I don't know how much longer he stuck around after I left, but he definitely was in ROI after I had left the guild.
Okay. All right. And I have another question. What is could we actually, let me pull my notes up here so it's a little easier. The difference between hardcore versus casual. How do you what attributes define a casual and then which ones define a hardcore? How would you describe it?
So I think that that question is largely relative, right? Um, there are going to be people that think that a person is hardcore not based upon whether or not they are, but whether or not they are in relation to them, right? Um, you know, I look at hardcore as like, you know, for us, say in Faceless Fury, right? Like we played like 30 out of 35 hours during Planes of Power launch to kill it as fast as possible. I mean, in
Yes,
terms of
sir.
TLP rating, I don't think you
It's
can
my
be much more.
crowning. It's my
I don't think
pride
you
and
could be
joy.
more hardcore than that, right? Like that's pretty hardcore. Like, and I think objectively
That's
that
great.
is, right? But there could be someone else who like thinks, oh, well, you played 12 hours in the first day. That's ridiculous. That's the craziest thing I've ever heard. But to us, that's like a third of what we did, right? So, I mean, I just think that a lot of it's relative. I think that one of the great things about Faceless is that we have a community of people who, for the most part, really, really want to be the best, right? And we really, really want to absolutely dominate every expansion. And it's basically like that's the only goal. So the means is irrelevant. It's like, hey, this is what we're doing. It might take 30 hours, it might take 8 hours, but whatever it takes, we're going to do it. Um, and I think for everybody, you could say, hey, to me, some of this casual might be hardcore to somebody who is actually casual, right? There might be somebody who logs in, you know, 30 minutes a night just to say hey to their friends and go kill, a couple mobs in Velks, right? And we might say, oh, that person's super casual. But, you know, it's just relative to the way that we view the game and that we digest the content.
So one of my favorite things was this expansion, Planes of Power launch, and you basically posted in all the all the class channels like, hey, I'm looking to be a total degenerate for 48 hours. I'm going to I'm putting together a select team of ultra super people. If you want to be involved in this degeneracy, I'd love to have you.
Yeah, basically, it's just like we wanted to set up I guess, a static, as you will, of like an XP group that, like, as soon as we were done with Prague, we were going to spend, you know, like 15-hour sessions a day grinding XP to make sure that we had all our AAs maxed, all the AAs banked for GOD, and we were 100% prepared for the entire expansion moving forward because I didn't want to like drag that out. I had several days off from work. I even took the following Monday off because I knew I'd be tired. And so it's like, hey, look, if you want to just go crazy ham and you want to get all this stuff done, like hit me up. And so we had some crazy XP sessions where, you know, we just got ridiculous amounts, just pulling nonstop for hours and hours and hours on end. So, and I'll do that every expansion. Every expansion I'll try to put together a little team, and there's going to be a lot of the same suspects in there.
So
Um,
what does that what does that do to the rest of the 3 months of Planes of Power for you?
it just means I get to relax. I don't have to like I front load everything, right? So like I don't have to grind any XP. Like I can log in and chill. If I want to like log in one night for a couple hours and go to Plane of Fire with some buddies and kill some shit, I can. But like I have all my A's maxed. I already have 100 A's banked for God. I don't need to do anything now. I just get to relax. And so I think that what I like to do is just get all that work done. I'll take the time off from work and then I will be set and then I don't have anything hanging over my head and I don't have to worry about anything.
Wow, okay, that's I've always had a hard time playing a game when there's no progression. Like it sounds like you completed it for your character within within the first week.
I did, absolutely, for sure.
So it's the enjoyment of the flow of combat, social engagement with the guys we play with, the guys and girls. Like it's the is that what keep would you say that keeps you interested in EverQuest?
Well, I think the thing that I enjoy the most is the launches, right? Like, um, we'll just say that the way that we approach launches on Mischief is vastly different than the way that we approach launches here. And I didn't always enjoy the launches on Mischief, but the way we do them here on Teak is much different. We have a much more focused group of like really, really go hard people, and it's really, really enjoyable. Like our pop launch was, I'm gonna say it might have been the most enjoyable launch I've ever done in all the TLPs I've done because we were basically really, really organized. Our administrative team did a fantastic job of like getting all our key pieces for like Bastion of Thunder. We had like every raid group had like a very, very strict goal. There was no waiting around, there was no standing around. And that hasn't always been the case in previous expansions on Mischief, to where it's been super enjoyable. And there were some launches on Mischief where I was just like dreadfully tired and worn out because it just wasn't an enjoyable experience.
Could you share what the Planes of Power launch experience was like for you from the beginning?
For
For
this
Teak, for
for
Teak.
Teak, it was
Yeah.
great. Like we got in, we just started going through basically every flagging raid went off without a hitch. Um, we went. The only kind of hiccup we had was, and it was just because people were tired because we'd been going a really long time. We were doing Planar Earth B, which is the Wrath Council, which is notoriously the shittest thing to do in the entire expansion. And we were kind of about 75% there with getting everything set up. And somehow through some mez breaks and some miss mezzes, I don't really know all the details. We kind of had the wheels fall off the bus and we wiped on the Wrath Council. And that's when I think we took a 4 hour nap and then we came back and we destroyed it. Just because people needed a little bit of a breather. We'd been going for a really, really long time.
Yeah,
Um,
I think the augments were the issue there. The dot, those Wolfenite, not the Wolfenite, the other one that has a dot on it.
yeah, the Anastage gems. Yeah, there was definitely a problem with those. There's no doubt. But
What was
aside
your
from that, like everything was super smooth. I mean, obviously we wiped a Talon once or twice, I think, but I mean that's to be expected. A lot of people still don't really understand how that fight works in terms of positioning and the AOE, but not really any big hiccups. We absolutely smashed the record. It was really, really good. I think overall there's very little that we could have done differently other than just not wipe on Wrath Council because that was such a huge time sink.
how do you how so I was there the whole 29 hours and it was one of the most challenging things I've ever done in my life. Like how did but also the one of the greatest things, like I'm still riding the high off of that. It's I can't like I now know like that's what I love the most is doing these launches. It's the most fun for me for sure, going
Yeah.
progressing through the whole thing. And it's worth going through. Did you go, was it, did at any point of did you get tired at all? Were you like, did anything happen while you were playing that was challenging?
No, I mean it's my third full clear of Planes of Power. I kind of know what to expect, especially in that expansion specifically, that it's going to be a long, arduous kind of haul. I think you kind of what I typically do is I have a desk that can be turned into a standing desk, and like if I'm getting really tired, I will just kind of like put my desk up and walk in place because there's a lot of times where you don't really have to be doing a whole lot because you're in between encounters and you're running to a particular place, and so you don't need to be like hyper focused. Um, but I feel like as long as you really really kill yourself when you drink way too much caffeine because you're going to crash super hard, or you drink way too much sugar, or if you eat too much, that's really the big kicker. So typically what I do is I have like protein shakes. And I don't really eat a whole lot of solid food because that's going to really, really weigh you down and get like, if you're already tired and you eat a big meal, forget about it. You're
Yeah, yeah.
done. You're not going to make it. And there's no amount of
Uh-uh.
caffeine that's going to keep you up.
No. Interesting. Okay. Yeah, because the I think the toughest part moment, well, there was a couple. The Wrath Council was like a second win up until the once we got into the Wrath Council, I was so amazed at finally seeing it because I'd only ever heard about it and I'd always ever heard how tough it was. And I didn't even know what the guy, I thought we were going to be fighting a bunch of Ralos Zek giant ogre things.
Oh,
And then they were like
nice.
these little tribesmen.
Yeah, yeah, it's a super annoying encounter.
Uh,
Like it's terrible.
but also like because it's challenging, that's like honestly, I like it, that made it enjoyable. And I was when they said we're taking a 4 hour break, it was like the sunlight beamed on my existence, and I was like, uh,
I mean, I enjoyed the 2.5 hour nap I got for sure.
what oh yeah, the plane of Earth when we were doing the second run of the plane of Earth, that's what was probably the most difficult for me, like inside of my head. Um, okay, so let's go back to Triality. You're in Triality, you take a break from EverQuest, you go to Warcraft.
Hmm.
Um, what is you joined retail WoW?
Correct. There was only retail WoW at that point.
Right. And what was that like for you? Did you look for a guild that how did you what drew you to it? What were you interested in about with it?
So uh, it was horrible for me, honestly. Um, the reality was that I went from thinking that I was like this god gamer and the best guild of EverQuest, playing, doing the content the first, was basically one of the top couple DPS in the guild every night. Um, and I go to World of Warcraft, and the game like technically is like 50x what EverQuest is. Um, Positioning is a lot more challenging. The um, the rotation, there's actually like real rotations you have to do, and I was just horrible. I couldn't even move efficiently in the game, and when I started out playing World of Warcraft, I was like one of the worst players in the entire game, just because I was, we call them keyboard turners, and there's probably still people that keyboard turn in EverQuest where you use the arrows to turn, um, and that's really really bad. But it's another topic. But I
You mean
had to come.
you mean other than WSAD?
Yeah, exactly. So like I would initially, when I was playing EverQuest, I always used the arrow keys to turn, and then I would use kind of the shift arrow key to strafe, and then I basically had like all my stuff keybound to the number pad, and so I would basically control my character like that. And
So
you
you
just
didn't
can't,
even really use the mouse.
not at all. It was crazy. Okay. I mean, I was so terrible at like effectively moving. And so when I got to World of Warcraft, you couldn't play like that. You had to use your mouse and you had to use WASD. And I'd never done it before. And I had to literally retrain my brain in how to like think and move around the game effectively. And it took me a long time to really, really develop that muscle memory. And like now I just play EverQuest the same way that I play WoW, in terms of my movement. But it was really challenging for me to like actually, go from being a complete, you know giga chad in EverQuest to being an absolute shitlord in World of Warcraft. Like I was so bad. Like I tell people about how bad I was in World of Warcraft, and it's hilarious how bad I was. um and eventually I overcame it, and I became a really really solid player in World of Warcraft. But it just took a lot of work and a lot of effort, and it wasn't something that came naturally or easy to me, that's for sure. And then I just really, really took all of that kind of like pride and drive to be the absolute best, and I just absolutely just kind of dove into the game when Cataclysm came out after Wrath of the Lich King, and then I played World of Warcraft for about a decade, really.
Wow, what was that like?
It was great. It was again at the start was really rough, but you know I think the tough thing about World of Warcraft and even EverQuest back in the days, you have kind of this conflicting problem to where you have friends that you play the game with, and they are, you know, at a certain level, and you want to be at a much higher level. And so it's kind of like, they say like in general, you make about the same amount of money as your closest group of friends, right? So it's the same thing. If you play with a bunch of people who aren't any good and they don't ever have any aspirations of improving, you're probably not going to improve. Now, that's not to say you still can't have fun, but I wanted to really, really push myself to become a great player. And so what ended up happening is I went through this weird cycle where I would uh, have a group of friends. and we would kind of get a little group together and we would start raiding together. And we would get to a point where I wanted to keep progressing, and we'd get to a point where they didn't want to go any further. Like they were already at a point where they weren't having fun anymore, and I just couldn't understand that. So I went through that kind of
Wow.
cycle a couple times to where I was constantly pushing myself, constantly trying to get better. Um, and eventually I ended up going from like the rank 5,000 guild in the United States to like the rank 5 guild in the United States over the course of a couple
Whoa.
years. Um,
Whoa.
and it was I didn't really like the US 5 rank guild. That was more hardcore than I wanted to go. And so I kind of settled in about the US 50-ish rank is where I kind of like settled and where I had all my success. And basically became a 16-time cutting edge raider, which means that you complete the tier on mythic difficulty before the next tier is released. And I did that in 16 tiers, I think almost all of them consecutively.
16 raid releases basically.
Yeah. Um, and I had a lot of success there. I did very well. I ended up being kind of the raid leader and GM of a guild called Imba. Um, that was, between like US 30 and US 70 the entire time that I was there, raiding and leading raids. And it was a lot of fun. It was really, really cool to be around people that finally kind of all had the same mindset that I did. Because I think a lot of times what you run into, especially in like in this game in particular, and even in other games, but it's like no matter how you want to interact or digest the content, it's fine. There's nothing wrong with how anybody wants to play the game. The problem arises when you put two people with conflicting goals in the same group and you try to, coexist, because that's going to be difficult, because you're going to have one person that doesn't really understand the other person's viewpoint. And it's not that either one of them are doing anything wrong. It's just they don't agree on what the right thing to do is. And when I got into that guild, it was really refreshing to have like, there wasn't a single person that wasn't on the same page as me. It was, hey, we want to raid 12 hours a week. We're going to go super hard for progression. And, you're going to be expected to do all the out of work raid stuff out of raid work stuff that's required to play at this level.
Okay, this is really I've got a few questions about this now because this really speaks to the hardcore relativity. Um, what was the cap for you, that number five guild? What was too hardcore for you?
They played 25 hours a week. You had to maintain two fully geared raid alts, which was that's way more work than just raiding 25 hours a week because you have to gear those characters. Um, and it was just the amount of time and effort that you have to put into being like a really, really high end World of Warcraft player is insane. Um, and so I kind of fell back. Imba was we peaked I think at US 30, but we were usually like US 50 to US 70 in that range. Um, and we didn't require a single alt, so you just had to play your one character. We only rated 12 hours a week. We say only. That's more than most guilds in World of Warcraft. But it was a really, really nice amount of rating and work to do that didn't require you to like, you know, be a super degen and not have a job, right? Because I was still working a full-time day job, and then playing in the evenings. So that was really, really kind of a nice, comfy spot for me to where I could feel like we were doing good things and we were progressing well and we had a successful guild, but at the same time, I didn't have to make it my job.
Right. It's interesting that you pointed out the progression of when you start playing and you learn the game, and then you have the ambition to be better and progress more efficiently. And the people that you're going with, you kind of have to leave behind as you pursue the same minded into same essence, basically, of the attitude that you have.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that there's a lot of people that kind of struggle with that social aspect of the game. It's like, hey, I have these friends, and for some people, these are people they've known for years, right? Like they couldn't even imagine being like, okay, well, we can still be friends, but I'm going to go join this other guild because they're kind of more in line with the way that I want to play the game. And I think a lot of people struggle with that in some way or another. And I think a lot of times their default is just to kind of stick with their social group because at the end of the day, these games are all social, right? The whole premise of this is like having a group of people that you enjoy playing the game with. And so I'm maybe not as lucky as some of those people because those people are probably a lot of times having more fun than I am because they're just playing with their friends every time. And they're not necessarily worried about, oh, did we take an extra 3 weeks to kill this braid boss because, we're not as good as this other group. So I think there's give and take to all of it, that you can definitely have a more um engaging and socially great experience without trying to climb the ladder all the time. But I think for me in general, climbing the ladder and just excelling was what really, really drove me.
Yeah, that's what you like about like gaming. Like it's not
Yeah,
just it's also understanding it fully so you can be the most competent at it while you're playing it because you want to win.
absolutely.
Okay, so you're going through World of Warcraft. What happens to where you were doing Mythic Key runs too? I saw that. You were talking about that.
Sure, yeah, we did. But I was never like a super hardcore Mythic Plus player. I did Mythic Plus as a way to gear my character for rating. I never did Mythic Plus as like a game mode that I was trying to be really great at.
Right. Okay. Okay, so how does your World of Warcraft spell come to a close, or are you still playing?
I think it just got to the point where I guess World of Warcraft scratches an itch for me that is like this competitive skill drive. But at the end of the day, I think that I'm an EQ head and I just enjoy the game more. And I've reached a point in my life now where like, spending 45 hours a week playing World of Warcraft is just not really what I want to do anymore. And so the last tier that I did actual mythic progression was the last tier of the last expansion, um, Dragonflight. And then after we finished progression, we killed the final boss. I I just I just decided I was going to take some time off from the game and just see if it was something that was really driving me, or if it was just something that I'd been doing for a long time and I was going to continue to do. And I haven't really felt the urge to go back and play it all. And then when I heard about the new TLP that was going to be a Mischief clone, I was like, "Oh yeah, I got to go check that out." And I've had a blast playing. It's just been like a super great, enjoyable experience for me. And I've no intention of quitting playing. So now I just kind of play and relax, and I really have to put like probably less than 10 hours a week into the game, and I can still play at a very high level and make all of our raids. And then I've just been playing a bunch of poker and just kind of relaxing a whole lot more.
So what was it like when you left the guild on Dragonflight? Did you let everybody know what you were doing?
Yeah, I just said, hey, I'm gonna take a break for at least the rest of this expansion, and I gave him 2 weeks to try to recruit somebody else for my spot, and I raided for a couple more weeks and left on good terms. It was, I think that for most people that play that game at a relatively good level, having people dip in and out for different expansions and tiers is pretty common. So I think as long as you're just honest with people and you let them know what's going on, I don't think you're really going to have too many problems. If you're like an absolute dickhead about it, then yeah, people are going to think you're an asshole. But I think just being honest with people, letting them know how you're feeling and where you're at. I mean, what are they going to do? Say no, you can't stop playing?
Well, I'm curious because I guess my life has been this is I guess I'm 37 and
Mhm,
I'm finally learning how to be intentional with what I'm doing. Like to think ahead. I've always kind of just gone with what I've felt and I've
mhm,
never really my whole life up until a few years ago has always been feeling based more so than um, goal oriented or I always was doing what I felt like I needed to do or should do, but I never really was great at understanding what Adam or Smouse needs or what he is interested in, and then solidifying that or expressing that or knowing that.
mhm.
So to me, it's because I look at people when they post in the Discord, they'll leave a message saying they're leaving and they're taking a break. They got to do real life, and I've always kind of been interested in that because there's one way to look at it is I'm playing a game and it's just a game, and when I turn the computer off, it doesn't mean anything. But then there's the other way, which is, I'm actually a real person with real people that are interested in this thing, that we're creating real connections, and it's worth honoring that, even if the computer's off.
Hmm.
So let's talk about, I'd like to talk about your Mischief time. So because you didn't play EverQuest from House of Thule up
Hmm.
until when you joined Mischief. What was it? You just heard about the TLP, the rule set, and you were like, I'm going to try this out, or did someone tell you about it?
Okay, so I guess I lied. I had kind of tooled around on a couple TLPs a little bit, but not in any real capacity. And I always wanted to do a TLP, like the actual launch, and I just barely missed it. They were in Kunark, and I'm like, okay, well, I've done all this shit before Kunark, so I'm just gonna hop in and see what happens. And just started playing, and really, really had a great time. It was probably the very beginning of 2021, if I remember correctly. Probably close to 4 years ago at this point. Um, and I didn't really actually play Mischief for very long, which is crazy because I basically played from the start of Velios till the start of God. And then I took a break for quite a while, and I came back in Solteris, and I played from like Solteris till Seeds of Destruction or something like that, and then I pretty much quit playing there. So I didn't really have a lot of time on Mischief, but I was actually a part of the leadership team for almost the entire time I was doing that. And so a lot of people that's played on Mischief remember me, from that time.
Yeah, how did that happen, by the way? How did you get into, did Zaid contact you or one of the other officers and just ask if you were open to doing it?
That's that's a so I guess yes and no. Basically what happened was I started playing. There was a person that led kind of our off like open world raid nights called Cassiera, and she just wasn't a really strong raid leader. She did a lot of things very well, but that wasn't really her calling, was not being a raid leader. And so I actually reached out to Zayd and her and said, "Hey, what do you guys think about me leading the raids on these open world off night stuff?" Because we were doing like super Degen shit. Like we would literally be in North Temple of Ishan all night till like 9 o'clock in the morning, just camping the zone, waiting for dragons to spawn to kill them. We did it forever. Um, and that's kind of how I got introduced to it. And then, basically we were really struggling with the amount of time it took to clear North Temple of Ishan on our raid nights. For kind of a combination of factors. We didn't have a great way to deal with loot, so we were literally bidding off loot in guild chat as we were going through the instance, and it was really holding us up. And then we also had, again, kind of the fancy pulling syndrome where people were trying to single pull things constantly. And I just told Zayd one night, I was like, look, I'm going to pull the whole zone. Just tell everyone to stay in camp. And we cleared the whole zone in like 2.5 hours. And then basically
That's
from that
great.
night on, we started hearing the chimes like Jadawin for raid leader, just like make Jadawin do this. Or it was still Sval then. So, Sval for raid leader. And then I just started leading basically the bulk of our raids. And I led the bulk of Mischief raids from basically then until I stopped playing in God. Basically led a raid every night for several months, um, and then stopped playing. But yeah, I
Wow.
mean, yeah, I think it's a lot of times it's organic because you get a person who's competent and outspoken, and they can kind of lead a crew. Um, we have several guys like that now, who just kind of organically have been like, oh, okay, well, you know what's going on. You're able to tell people what to do, and you can kind of express what you need to happen. And so we're going to put you in this role. Um, and unfortunately, there is a big disconnect between. It's like any other thing. Like we have this kind of systemic problem in kind of America where we have a person who's good at a job, right? Like say that job is you're a great player in a raid guild, or like you work in a restaurant, you're a great waiter or your server, whatever you want to call it, right? We have this tendency to promote that person to manage the people that do that job when that's a completely different skill set than just doing the job, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And so the thing that I've really developed kind of the skill set of being able to lead raids really effectively. And they're just little things that a lot of times people wouldn't think about. It's like A really good example is in World of Warcraft, like tank externals is a big thing where you'd say, I need a pain suppression, which makes the tank take 40% less damage for 12 seconds, right? And like there's just little things that you learn over time of doing the job. It's like, so I need a pain suppression in 5 seconds. Well, we've already said that you had the pain suppression before you said 5 seconds, right? And just a little bit of shift in what you say is like, hey, in 5 seconds, I'm getting the pain suppression, be ready, right? So I've said the same thing, but I've said it in a way to where I can actually get what I need done properly. And I think a lot of times people that struggle in terms of raid leading just have this thought process that everyone's going to know exactly what to do and they're going to know exactly what they mean. And maybe they're just not a great communicator or they're not really good at giving direction or giving information because all those things are different than just being a good player, you know?
Oh yeah,
Um,
it's a whole skill set. Like that's what I was asking Doomsday about was like how did you stepping into comms and speaking to 50 to 72 people? Like
mhm.
just doing that, the public speaking required for something like that is not you know, not everybody wants to do that.
Yeah. And so it was funny because Doomsday was never a raid leader when I before I had quit, but I guess he became one after I quit. But that's good. He's a super chill guy. He's got the right temperament for it, you know. Um, and that's another thing. You need to be pretty chill, right? Like if you get all bent out of shape about little mistakes all the time, then you're just gonna end up, you know, people are gonna end up hating you because you're just correcting them all the time. And ultimately, you know, you have to know your audience. You know, if you're with a group of people who want that kind of interaction, that kind of criticism and feedback, that's great. But let's be honest. I mean, we're doing a TLP in EverQuest. People don't want to be told that they're crap and they need to improve that much, right? Like
No, they
you
don't.
can nudge them a little bit, but you just need to make sure that you do it in a way that doesn't like embarrass them or you know cause them grief, right?
Sure, you want to be
Yeah.
constructive. One of
And
my
in
favorite.
other games like World of Warcraft, you don't necessarily need to be as constructive because there's just so many players that want to be where that person's at that it's you have a lot more you know latitude in terms of what you can say. But in this game in particular, there's a lot of people who get in their feels if you just tell them they're doing something wrong, you
Oh
know.
yeah, oh yeah.
So I've just learned to kind of temper that. I mean, even on Mischief, I was a lot more headstrong in terms of like telling people, hey, you're terrible for lack of better, like what you're doing is bad. And now I just kind of go with the flow and just have a good time, you know? So I think I've kind of matured in the fact that, you know, if people aren't playing perfectly, it doesn't like ruin my day anymore.
No, yeah, it should. That's what I've always sensed from you is you're very sincere and you're very efficient and you know what you're doing. You have the knowledge, but you're not taking it serious. It's not like there's not this it's not like a serious thing for you.
Yeah, not anymore. I mean, there was a time where it was, but I mean, I think that again, got to know your audience, right? Like most people are just here to have a good time, hang out, you know, slay some internet dragons and talk to their buddies.
Yeah.
Um, so, and I'm okay with that, you know?
One of my favorite parts of the launch on Planes of Power this season was on comms. Anytime something would be, some bullshit would happen, and Zaid's response was always like his first response was always like, "What do you mean this is happening? What do you mean this is happening?" And I'm fully expecting him to lose his shit. But then like something happens in between that breath, he like gets it together and it's like he brings it back down. And I was like,
Yeah.
wow, like that's just impressive to see the first, we don't want to react to things, we want to respond to things. But when you're haven't slept in 20 hours, you're reacting, but then he's reining it back in and keeping it calm and collected. And I was just so amazed at the ability to be emotionally agile in that way.
Yeah, I mean, there was a couple times where I thought he was going to lose it too because there were some things that happened that I was just like, "Wow, what is going on right now?" But yeah, he didn't ever actually look. There was only one instance where I was like, "This is going to go sideways quick," but he did all right. Like you could definitely tell there were some touch and go moments there where he had to be like, "Okay, I got to rein it in, or I'm going to go crazy right now."
That was my favorite part about the whole I felt like we were in that moment in time, we were this organism, and it was like we had to we had to learn how to move together, be okay together, screw up together, and we went through the whole progression. It was amazing.
Good stuff.
All right, let's talk about the metagaming and min-maxing. you do these parses. So you're looking at weapons, you're going to test server.
Mhm.
What are you doing when you go over there? How does that work?
So essentially, what I'm doing is, unfortunately, this game came around a couple years too late. Okay, um, to where there's not a lot of resources that are accurate about the game anymore. And then there have been so many changes over the years, it's even tougher. And so what you end up with is you end up with kind of anecdotally bad information that's kind of been passed down and perpetuated over the years that just isn't accurate. Um, and then people say things that I don't necessarily agree with, and I don't think is correct. Now, unfortunately, a lot of times what you run into is you run into somebody who doesn't really have a knowledge base for how something actually functions in the game. All they're really doing is regurgitating information from somebody who said something sometime. And maybe that was an officer in an old guild, or maybe that was a guy who actually parsed well in a previous guild. And that is taken as a point of fact when it might not be. It may be, but I have always been the person that I was like, I don't necessarily want to be right, but I want to get it right, you know? So if there's something that I don't understand how it works, like with the PPM system or the way that, say, Speed Focus interacts with dual wield versus two-handed weapons, I want to figure that stuff out. And so I run lots and lots of parsing that basically breaks down how everything works, and I kind of layer it on top of each other. So like, let's say during Secrets of Fade, where I did probably, I'm gonna guess, between 200 and 300 hours of parsing for Berserker, just to really really break down, how different abilities layered on top of each other and how they would actually increase your damage. Um, because a lot of times when people are telling you things, they're not telling you them because they know, they're telling them because that's what's been passed down to them.
Sure.
And a lot of times those things are just incorrect. And so I just want to make sure that I know the right answer. And a lot of times the right answer just means you have to go set up a test dummy in the arena on the test server and, gather a bunch of data, just to really, really find out, hey, this is what's optimal. This is not optimal, using this discipline in this spot and using this discipline in this spot, stacking these disciplines, what have you. Um, there's a lot of things that really are very easy to figure out. They're just time consuming. And I think a lot of times people don't want to spend the time to figure those things out. And then they maybe, again, kind of get in their feels when someone's like, well, you're wrong, and they don't want to be told that they're wrong because, hey, I've been playing the game for 20 years, so I know what I'm talking about. And I can say almost 100% of the time, if someone says, I've been playing this class for this long, I know what I'm talking about, they're wrong. Okay. Almost every time I've heard someone say that, they've been wrong. It's like the reality is you've been playing poorly for 20 years, not, and you think that because you've been doing that for that long, that makes you good or knowledgeable, whatever. Right. And so I like to just figure out the answer. So a lot of times people ask me things like, hey, what do you think about this? And it's like, well, this is what I think, but I don't really know. So let's just go run a couple 24-hour parses on it and find out which one's better, right? Um, and I have another computer, and I'm running parses right now as we're speaking on the test server, to kind of differentiate damage between different weapon types for GOD with GODAs, and it's just something that is a kind of a passion project of mine, of like always knowing what you should be doing.
I noticed during Teak, I joined during when did I join Teak this year? I joined during Velius, but I didn't get to max level to join Faceless until the very end. So I was really started in Luckland.
Hmm.
And I noticed that you switched to a wizard. You were something else.
Right.
You were a ranger. Oh no,
No, I
wait.
was a monk.
You were a monk. Okay. And
Yeah.
everybody was doing ranger, and then you went wizard.
Yeah. So I'm a bit of a character whore in that I believe that the with the ability to have personas and the ability to swap between classes pretty easily, um, you should um, you should be able to play like the best class almost all the time. You can make a case that Ranger was the best class in Luckland. You can make the case that the Wizard was the best class in Luckland. I don't think there's really much of a difference between the two. I think that for the most part, if you play at a high level, you could have been very successful at either one of those classes. Um, and I think that Wizard was a great choice. Throughout the entirety while I was playing Wizard, I was the number one boss DPS for every combined raid that we did. I never was second place on that. Um, Now the Rangers definitely beat me on the overalls when we were actually doing trash, but we were skipping around so much that it was very, very hard for a Ranger to keep up with me on bosses because they're very, very good in True Shot, but outside of True Shot, they were not as good. And the Wizards just like consistent excellence with no disciplines is really, really what made them a fantastic class. And so I really felt like that was going to be the best class overall, and I really felt like I made the right choice there. Um, we basically I just felt like we really, really did a fantastic job on the Wizard for the whole expansion and pretty much just dominated.
Yeah, it's so do you imagine so you're into the DPS, so like depending on what the meta class is, which you'll figure out, that's what you want to play?
Well, yeah, to a certain degree. I mean, I played a Necromancer, which is going to be the meta class when we get to like say Seeds of Destruction, and I did very well in the class, and it's so powerful, but it's extremely arduous to play. And so I'm never going to play one again just because I just don't enjoy the play style.
Ah,
Um, Basically, casting and tracking 10 separate dots that you have to keep applying and reapplying to targets is just kind of cumbersome, I believe.
wow. Yeah, I mean, that's more than I've ever had to do on WoW.
Yeah. So um, what I'm going to do is I'm probably going to play Monk until sometime between TSS and SOF, and then I will swap to Wizard again, and then I'll just play Wizard forever after that. Just because the Wizard quality of life is unmatched in terms of playing a character. The way they do damage is second to none. You have like this instant application of damage where you hit a button, you cast a spell, you do big damage, right? There's not like Necromancer where you cast a spell and then it does 1/10 of its damage every 6 seconds for a minute, right? Now, obviously, Necromancer is still very strong as you can stack all these dots and you can use disciplines and it does tons of damage, but it's very cumbersome to where it's like Wizard, you're like, okay, ethereal, snap, and you're just going to absolutely blow everything up. There's no wait for that. You can do like a really high damage, high mana sustain setup where you're doing lots of sustain damage, but you're not doing like the peak damage. And if you have like situations where you want to really, really go hard, you can just hit every button and just blow something up. Um, and I just feel like in terms of quality of life, there's nothing better than Wizard. The most annoying thing about playing a melee class is just chasing mobs around. It's
Yeah.
so cumbersome. It's like, why do I have to keep moving? I got to keep moving. It's like someone's knocking this mob around. If you're playing a
Yeah.
wizard, literally you target a mob and you just stand there and you just absolutely destroy it. You don't have to move. You don't have to reposition. You just destroy it.
You get a
Again,
good view of the battlefield.
that's right. And so it's like, to me, it's this quality of life. Um, I basically played range DPS for most of my career in WoW, and the only reason I'm playing Monk now is because they're just astonishingly good compared to the other classes, and they will be for the next year or so.
Right. Yeah. I went with Monk just to have a different experience. So what when all the competition was happening and we had Sloan, remember Sloan?
Yeah,
And I mean, he was always watching, he was always tracking. He got his kicks the most out of the competitive aspect of EverQuest when there's somebody fighting you for a raid target. Are you into that whole deal, showing up for the bat phones? Were you participating in that way?
that is just not a game mode that I enjoy. No, I
Okay.
prefer to do like DZ rating. Um, and I understand that there's a group of people that really enjoy that kind of open world, competitive. And you could even say there's a group of people who that's the only reason they do TLPs is that whole like drama back and forth, like you suck, no, you suck. We're gonna get this kill. We're better than you. No, you're better than us. It's like and like there's people feed on that. Like if you go to like the official EQ Discord and go to like the T like it's just like literally pages and pages and pages of people talking shit back and forth. And it's just kind of funny to me. Um, because ultimately, we're not very far off from like there not really being any more open world content ever again, right? It's
Yeah.
just going to be DZ rating. You're going to show up on your nights. You're going to have like this very short window of competitiveness when a new expansion goes live. Um, and that's it, and I think that that is one of the big reasons why TLPs like fall off so hardcore after Planes of Power is because that like strife and drama and like personal conflict between groups. I feel like there's a lot of people who really feed off of that energy and really like that kind of aspect of the gameplay. And it's just not been something that I have personally enjoyed. I just love showing up to raids and like dominating and having a good time, and then I just want to go home. Like when when you were in situations where you basically have two people who are trying to fuck each other over, you end up in these really toxic, crappy situations. Like I remember like poop socking is what they call it, right? Where we were poop socking Trachanon, and there's like 175 people sitting in Trachanon's room. He spawns and he dies in 12 seconds. It's like, so we waited for hours in this zone with a bunch of people talking shit to each other so we could kill a dragon in 10 seconds. And it's like, I'm sorry, that's just not an enjoyable game experience for me. I don't have fun there, you know? It's
Yeah.
and I get that some people like that, and that's cool. They should do it, but it's just like I have not really done a whole lot of open world content. I hope that people enjoy it, do it. But I'm going to be much happier when we just go to like standard DZ raids, and then you burn lesson with your buddies on their off days and just have a good time grinding AAs. That's what I enjoy doing in the game.
Yeah, I'm predicting that those days are pretty much over. Like even if another TLP comes out this year, I mean, I don't see the player base being able to sustain that level of competition on these live servers. Just it feels like that, at least I was playing around with like, because I admired what Sloan was doing and I liked showing up at that mountain to feel like I was part of this us versus them thing.
Mhm.
But it's the amount of time it takes to do it and then how big Faceless is and how I don't know, it felt like the only way it would be enjoyable is if we just split ourselves in two and competed with each other. But we do that on DZ nights if we just split the raids appropriately.
Yeah. So I think Sloan came at a good time where, you know, it was really weird because this experience has been much different than Mischief because on Mischief, we were not the dominant force on Mischief until Gates of Discord. We never were really the top of the pile there. We had some open world success, but for the most part, there was this guild called Greed is Good, and they pretty much ran the show for like Velios, Luckland, Plains of Power, and then in God we stomped them super hard in God. We just had a really good plan, and we had a great force, and we basically triple split to Nat before any other guild killed him, and that was like a big fuck you to everybody. Like, yeah, we're here and we're done. This server though has been we've dominated every launch, like not even close really. We did lose some open world targets towards like the end of Kunark, beginning of Luckland, but then Sloan came in and made a huge difference to us in terms of our open world success. And basically it got to the point to where, we didn't lose any more DPS races. If we showed up to an open world target, it was ours. And, it's kind of one of those things where, you know, it's uh it's easy to get to the top because you're constantly driven because you feel like the underdog. But as soon as you get to the top, it's a lot harder to stay content there because it's like, oh, we just win every time now. This isn't fun anymore. It's like we're just dominating every time. So
Yeah.
kind of a victim of his own success. And I think that without that kind of like competition and drive, I don't think the game has the allure for him anymore, which is
Oh,
which is
definitely
fine.
not. I
Yeah.
mean, yeah, I listened to the him and Zayd's conversation. That's what he's in it for. Like that's how he likes to play.
Yeah, and that's awesome. Good for him.
Yeah.
But well, ultimately that's a very small window into the long term, TLP life because there's going to be many, many expansions where there's no open world contents. You do the launch and then you raid your DZs, every Sunday, Monday, and you just call it a night.
So your plan moving forward then is just to stick with the class you like, and you want to. I'm trying to make it to live. I want to see all the content.
Nice.
So is that kind of you're just kind of what? Do you have any other goals besides just understanding the game and operating more efficiently? Do you have an expansion you want to get to?
I think I want to play as long as I'm having a great time. That's probably my only goal. Is like I don't want to stay past when I'm having a good time. I don't want it to become a chore. I think that, far too often in the last, 10, 15 years of gaming, I've made it about everything except for having fun. And for me, just like
Mm,
enjoying myself, having a good time, like I've tried to remove myself from any situation that wasn't enjoyable for me. Like if I was, doing a small man with people that I wasn't enjoying it with, I was just like, hey, best of luck to you guys, but I'm gonna go do something else. You know, I just it's almost like it's a lesson I learned from poker, playing poker a lot. It's like if you don't really want to be there, you shouldn't be there, you know,
mm.
because you're not going to enjoy yourself. You're not going to be successful. And ultimately, shit, I'm 47 years old now. I'm at the point in my life where, enjoying what I do as my hobby is more important than being like the absolute cutting edge best. I could go chase that dragon some more in World of Warcraft if I really wanted to, but that's just not really what I enjoy doing. So for me, it's just about fun, enjoying the game, getting to see the content that, we've done several times now, but still is fun. And just I really, really, get myself up to just really, really try to compete for that top slot for overall damage like every single night. It's like kind of a pride thing for me. It's like I don't ever really want to lose ever. It's like it's kind of ingrained in me. Like it's if it's like Ricky Bobby said,
If you
if
ain't
you're not
first, you're
first, you're
last.
last, right? And so I genuinely feel like that. So I always try to, but at the same time, like I feel good when someone beats me because so perfect examples are we got a monk in our guild named Arconus who's a very good player. He beat me in the overall the other night in Plains of Power, and like before I would get pissy about it, but now I'm just like that's awesome because I got another guy that's like really playing well. He's obviously being very intent with his play. He's cycling through his stuff. He's doing a good job, and it's like, hey, if I'm second, that just means we have a really really good player that's beating me, and that's okay. I would rather get beat by players than have players do 1/10 my damage, right? Because
It's hard to judge that though, because at certain nights you're polling and you're not able to do the damage that you would like.
oh sure, but that's just the way it is.
Yeah. Well, I gotta say, dude, this has been extremely enjoyable. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Um, Especially on your birthday, dude, taking the time out of your special day.
That meme will never die.
Taking the time out of your special day today to
Did you
come
and
on the
Doomsday
show.
talk about that
I was there, I think, when it happened.
the first time?
Yeah, because I was friends with Doomsday. I knew Doomsday from the Foreverquest podcast.
Nice.
And so when I came into Mischief, I'd already known Doomsday. And then, yeah, I think he started it.
He did. Absolutely he did. It's just I have no idea why it's persisted as long as it has, but it's funny, that's for sure. I think to me the funnier thing is that people are still saying it. It's still growing in popularity over and we're 4 years down the road now.
I know it's amazing. Like people are wondering what it is. And well, the best part about it is people will just join in the happy birthday without knowing.
It's even funnier. Someone linked some video from Mischief like 3.5 years ago, and in the frickin' guild chat on the video that was linked, it's like "Happy Birthday, Jadawin" up in the top right hand side, and it's just like someone even highlighted it and snipped it, and then they were like, "Look at this!" Like, oh my god, dude, never ending. But it's all
Yeah.
in good fun. I enjoy it. It's fun stuff.
I was glad to see you when I came back because when I think of Faceless, I think of you. I think of you and Zaid because my experience on Mischief was watching you play and then listening to Zaid and so yeah, it was really yeah, it was I didn't I was real I'm really glad you came on the show because yeah, you were one of the guests that I didn't ever know if I'd be able to get on here.
Yeah, I think it's funny because you have a video of yourself, and I've actually told people about this is that it's one of the few times that you're ever going to see like pure unadulterated like joy, and it's like we were doing Kadi Shah when we were all frogs, and
Man,
there's this video of you and you could just see it in your face. You're just like, this is the coolest thing I've ever done. You were having such a good time, and I feel like like to have that like that joy and that like absolute like engagement with what you're doing and being enjoying yourself so much, like so few people actually get that. So that I've always thought that was a pretty cool moment, where like you were just like, this is amazing.
I have it saved on my phone and I go look at it because that was one of the happiest moments of my life.
It
And it
was
was
awesome to see
captured.
how happy you were because it
I
was.
was Dude, I couldn't believe it. I never in my wildest dreams thought I'd be able to see this stuff in EverQuest. I just
Yeah.
didn't. So all these things lined up, and yeah, I'm just really glad to be here and to be participating in this game, have the ability to do it. I mean, I'm just constantly amazed. So yeah, man, thanks again. And yeah, we'll come back and we'll have some new parsing stuff to talk about in the future.
Sure.
And I'll get this loaded up for us. And is there anything you'd like to share? Anything that comes to mind before we wrap up?
No, man, I'm good. It was great. It was a good time talking to you.
All right, thanks, man. Well, that's it. Thanks for joining, and I'm gonna press the stop recording button.